Today on Ag News Daily.
The fact that on one hand you're hearing that you need to rebuild the herd, and on the other you're hearing that you need to take less money for your cattle, that is sort of immediately become the most important issue, and it's all stemming from this conversation about the president wanting to allow beef in from Argentina in higher quantities than we have now, and his belief that that is going to lower prices for consumers at the grocery store.
Well, welcome back to the weekly edition of the Ag News Daily Show. And you're chilly.
I'm chilly. It's cold outside. It's going to be a little bit of a chilly Halloween.
I know we still haven't turned the heat on in the studio. We're holding out as long as we can. Who else hasn't turned the heat on in their house yet? Could you imagine that?
We caved.
You caved. Well, we did get a much-needed rainfall throughout most of the southern plains and the Mid-South this week. They've been experiencing persistent drought heading into these systems that are now going into the fall and winter. The moisture help ease some of those dry soil conditions, and the Mississippi River near Memphis remains still about 8 feet below the low water mark. Here in the Midwest, we got scattered showers. They're also expected to end this week. While light precipitation may slow some harvest progress in some areas, temperatures will fluctuate and keep changing those conditions. Across the country, October brought a cooler than average weather season. In the West, warmer, but temperatures here in the central U.S. could see a warming pattern. That pattern's about to change and develop a trough over the Gulf of Alaska, and that is expected to push colder air into the eastern half of the country as we move into November. So you may not be out of the chilliness yet. Forecasters will say the overall pattern will stay variable, and that is typical for this time of year. As we look ahead into the long-range outlook, it points to a La Nina winter peaking early, which means the second half of the season could look much different than the first. So Delaney, we got a little over an inch of rain here in central Iowa last week, but it's amazing how much the soil absorbed it. Typically this year, once you get wet, you stay wet.
It definitely needed it. Well, the ongoing shutdown and lack of USDA data, of course, no report this week. But to fill the gap, Farm Journal conducted its own survey to gauge harvest progress, yields, and farmer sentiment. The results show U.S. corn are trending lower across much of the Corn Belt compared to USDA's September estimates. Soybean harvest was 84% complete as of Sunday, and corn harvest was 72% finished, according to a Reuters poll of 10 analysts earlier this week. In 6 of the 7 pro-farmer crop tour states, yields are down due to a combination of dry weather and disease pressure. The national average yield for 2025 could fall below last year's 179 bushels per acre. As of mid-October, nearly 3/4 of surveyed producers in those states reported steady to lower yields compared to earlier expectations. The sharpest decline was reported in Illinois, where yields are down about 7% from September estimates. And I was texting with Ted Seifert from the Zaner Group yesterday, maybe 2 days ago now. We were chatting about national average yields. So he's, I think, got a 181 and like a 51.5.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what these next reports come out. But happy Halloween to all of our Ag News Daily viewers. We certainly appreciate you tuning in. And if you're catching this after the fact, it'll be hard to believe it's already November. Americans are expected to spend a record $3.9 billion on candy this Halloween. That's according to the National Retail Federation. While candy costs are climbing, so are challenges facing sugar producers. The American Sugar Alliance reports retail candy prices are up about 19%, yet the cost of sugar in those products has jumped 33% on average. Sugar farmers are feeling the pinch. The costs of planting, cultivating, and processing sugar beets and sugarcane have surged, while the prices producers receive for their sugar has been dropping. For example, the Alliance points out that a 10-ounce bag of Reese's Peanut Butter Cups, not Reese's, Reese's Peanut Butter Cups, cost $5.49 last year, with just 21 cents going to the farmer. This year, that same bag will cost you $6.49, and the farmer's share has now dropped to 13 cents. Some interesting sugar news for our listeners there.
I love that we're sharing that on Halloween. I definitely bought a bag of Reese's candy for Halloween, so I contributed to that. But one more piece of exciting news this week before we head into some crop and livestock news. The National FFA Convention and Expo is wrapping up in Indianapolis, Indiana. While the convention is known for its energy, its competition, its celebrations, it's also where business decisions happen for the organization, such as the 1969 historic decision to allow women to join FFA. This year, delegates reviewed a proposal to make FFA chapter membership fees a mandatory affiliation at the national level, meaning one fee would cover all students enrolled in agriculture education programs. The change required a constitutional amendment, but delegates ultimately voted against it this year. According to a press release sent earlier this week, the National FFA Convention will remain in Indianapolis through at least 2040. So if your kids get into FFA, Tanner, they'll be headed to Indy. The announcement came during the kickoff of the 98th National Convention, which is expected to bring more than 71,000 FFA members, advisors, alumni, and supporters from across the country, making it the largest student-led convention in the nation. I know you were not a big FFA student, Tanner, but I have fond memories of National Convention.
It always looked like fun. I was envious of the other schools in our district that had FFA chapters, but certainly a good time for those kids. China's state-owned agri-food company, COFCO, has purchased 3 cargoes, which are approximately 180 metric tons of U.S. soybeans this week, making the country's first U.S. soybean buy of the season, set for a December and January shipment. While the deal is a positive sign for American agriculture, traders are still remaining cautious. China has already made several large purchases from South America, and weak soy meal prices are there raising questions. We will see if those questions about the profitability of additional imports, still optimism will renew trade between the two nations and will help lift soybean prices higher in Chicago. We did hear from Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. He said over the weekend that the U.S. and China have made strong progress in trade negotiations. He expects China to hold off on export controls of rare earth minerals, and the U.S. delays its threatened 100% tariffs. Bessent added that both sides agreed to a substantial agricultural purchase support U.S. farmers, sending soybean futures to their highest levels since 2024 in September. This is according to Consensus Ag consulting analyst Angie Setzer. In a follow-up announcement sent a few days later, Secretary Bessent said that China plans now to buy 12 million metric tons of U.S. soybeans before the end of the year, and that is 25 million metric tons annually over the next 3 years. He also noted that Asian buyers are considering sourcing an additional 19 million metric tons, while China is expected to make what is called a massive purchase of U.S. sorghum. Delaney. So some news there coming out of those conversations. And I bet you have more trade news.
I do. Soybeans definitely, though, just as a side note, we'll talk about this later, had quite the roller coaster week this week. The USTR office also announced over the weekend that it has reached a reciprocal trade agreement with Cambodia and Malaysia. Framework agreements were also secured with Thailand and Vietnam, aiming to eliminate trade barriers and boost U.S. agricultural competitiveness. The U.S. Grains and Bioproducts Council praised the announcement, saying these steps will help reduce costs for consumers and increase global demand for U.S. crops and products like barley, corn, sorghum, and ethanol. The Trump administration's deals with these Asian nations include new market access for U.S. ethanol and expanded product opportunities for corn and corn products, including DDGs with solubles. The National Corn Growers President Jed Bauer said eliminating tariffs on ethanol exports to Maine and Cambodia will provide a significant boost in demand. And the frameworks with Thailand and Vietnam show additional promise for U.S. corn growers in particular. Additionally, in some other trade news, unfortunately, the President Trump announced an immediate end to trade negotiations with Canada late last week. So a little bit of a monkey wrench there in those plans, Tanner, but hopefully not overshadowed by some of the positive news we have this week.
I missed that headline. I'm glad that you brought that in there as well. Hopefully that flips itself back around to our friends in the north. Well, the U.S. Senate has pushed back against President Donald Trump's tariffs, voting 52 to 48 to overturn the 50% duty tariffs on Brazilian beef imports, terminating the national emergency declared in July in retaliation of Brazil's prosecution of its former president. 5 Republican senators joined the Democrats in approving the measure, which seeks to end the national emergency Trump declared to justify those tariffs. According to Politico, this is the first of 3 resolutions aimed at stopping the president's tariffs on Brazil, Canada, and other countries worldwide. While the vote sends a strong message, it remains largely symbolic because Republican leadership in the House of Representatives has blocked a potential vote on the issue now until March. A little bit of a delay there, Delaney.
Well, SNAP, of course, is also causing a delay as the government shutdown drags on. I've seen a lot of interesting posts. I think I saw Taco John's posted something this week saying if you want to donate, they're trying to help support SNAP families. But nonetheless, USDA has announced that federal food aid will not be distributed to families nationwide, and many are reporting and responding to that. A Reuters report highlighted concerns from 9 food banks and anti-hunger organizations across 8 states, warning they may struggle to meet higher demand if SNAP funds aren't delivered. Hunger in the U.S. has been rising for years, and food banks have already seen record demand as inflation continues to strain household budgets. Feeding America, a national food bank network, reported that over 50 million people received assistance from food banks, pantries, and other charitable sources in 2023 alone. Related to the government shutdown, there's still no update on the Farm Bill as well. Lawmakers say progress has stalled, with members of both the House and the Senate Agriculture Committees noting that the so-called skinny Farm Bill is losing momentum. Some experts now believe it's unlikely to move forward until now, the new year.
How many years has it been?
A lot.
We did see something that hasn't happened except for one other time this year. The Federal Reserve cut its key interest rate on Wednesday for the second time, lowering it by 0.25 point to about 3.9%. This move is aimed at supporting economic growth and hiring, even as inflation remains elevated. While the rate cut was widely expected following the Fed's October meeting, concerns are rising after several major companies announced layoffs this week. General Motors plans to cut 1,700 jobs, mainly in its electric vehicle division, while Paramount and Amazon are eliminating 2,000 and 14,000 positions, respectively, all ahead of the holiday season. For agriculture, the lower interest rates bring a mixed effect. A weaker dollar can make U.S. commodities more competitive for foreign buyers, while reduced borrowing costs help farmers manage storage and expansion. However, uncertainty over job losses and tightened household budgets could limit overall product demand. Well, meanwhile, the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City has launched a new Center for Ag Economy to better connect farm and financial policy. Their Vice President, Nathan Kaufman, says that the center will provide an objective research on issues like interest rates and banking while ensuring agricultural voices are included in these federal economic discussions. It'll be interesting to see how they go about getting those farmers' voices and agriculture included in those, Delaney. It's always tough to get from A to B.
And I did a terrible job watching the news this week because I also missed the interest rate drop. But here is a headline I know I saw earlier this week. Economists at the Agriculture Economic Insights use the Kansas City Federal Reserve's farm loan summary data to measure the cost of borrowing for farm machinery. For the first half of 2025, it cost $154 to finance every $1,000 borrowed, which is the highest level on record since 1977. In recent years, that figure was significantly lower, around $135 in 24 and 23, and $100 in 22, and just $79 in 2021. The 2025 record stands out because it exceeds even the high interest environments of the 1980s. The difference comes down to loan duration. In 1981, interest rates on farm machinery loans approached 18%, but most loans were short-term, averaging about 11 months. In contrast, the first half of 2025, we saw an average farm loan term of 45 months, increasing the total cost of borrowing despite lower interest rates, which is a continued conversation we have. How are we comparing this to the 1980s?
Well, the headline everybody's been talking about is Argentina beef. This year's mix of challenges and success for the U.S. cattle industry. Beef supply tightened 3%, and retail prices averaged $8 a pound. Input costs continue to go up for those producers, yet consumer demand surged to a 40-year high. This is helping certified Angus beef reach one of the brand's strongest years in its history. Record sales in months of March and November, along with a strong spring, contributed to the brand's third best year ever. President Trump's plan to increase beef imports from Argentina has drawn criticism from U.S. producers. The National Cattlemen's Beef Association warns that bringing in more Argentine beef could hurt American ranchers while doing little to lower grocery prices. The U.S. already faces a deep trade imbalance with Argentina, said the NCBA CEO Colin Woodall, citing safety concerns due to the country's history of foot and mouth disease outbreaks. A lot more headlines could be shared on that, Delaney. Certainly one I know we'll be reporting on for weeks.
Well, we're going to talk about it in today's interview. It's interesting to note, too, this story, this reel on our Facebook page, Tanner, I don't know if you've seen it, is blowing up. People are very upset. They have strong opinions. And we sat down with National Cattlemen's Senior Vice President of Government Affairs this week, Ethan Lane, to talk about these headlines and more. So let's get into that interview now.
Well, there's a lot of issues, especially these past few weeks, as we look at the beef industry. We're here joined by Ethan Lane of the NCBA. So first, Ethan, why don't you kick us off with who you are and some of the recent priorities that NCBA is advocating for?
So Ethan Lane, I run the Washington, D.C. office for the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. So I serve as the head lobbyist for the industry and our association in that role, and oversee a team of folks from all different parts of the cattle industry. Most of my team here grew up in the cattle industry or around it, and our jobs are focused on advocating for the priorities that our members across the country, our 44 state affiliate organizations, the tens of thousands of producers that have informed all of those policy processes in those states and then informed our policy process nationally. Our job is to advance those priorities here in Washington, make sure that lawmakers up on Capitol Hill understand what producers are looking for out of Washington, and probably more often than not, what producers would like Washington to stop doing. In most cases, that's a lot bigger topic than what we would like from them. A lot of times we serve as kind of a translator, helping staff and members and agencies, whether it be USDA or the Department of Interior or EPA, have a little bit better insight, a little bit better data to make decisions and transmit those concerns from our producers around the country to those decision makers, so that they're armed with the right information and they know what cattle producers are trying to get accomplished.
Now, Ethan, there have been no shortage of issues that you at NCBA have been focused on. We've seen some comments from the White House regarding cattle producers, specifically related to New World screwworm, Argentinian beef exports, and a myriad of other issues related to food and wellness. In your mind, which of those issues are you most focused on that may have the ability to really shape what's going on right now in the beef industry?
So what we've learned about this, and we've been in a Trump administration before. This is the second time, obviously. We tend to be concerned about whatever one he's talking about at the moment, because that is the one that everybody wants to talk about. If I'm being honest about just all of the issues that we're dealing with right now, certainly New World screwworm is a massive issue for us right now. Working with USDA, working with our states, working with the Mexicans and their response down in Mexico to this, to ensure that we control this thing, we keep it in Mexico to the extent that we can, we slow its spread northward, and we prepare for the possibility that we could see it here at some point and need to deal with it as well. The funding for those things, the tools that the Secretary Rollins has announced and is working on to manage an outbreak were we to see New World screwworm in the U.S., the need for hundreds of millions of more sterile male flies every week to beat back that incursion, the need for states and the federal government to be coordinating what movement might look like, what those protocols might look like, if we do have to deal with that here. And then obviously working with the fact that the U.S. border is still closed to Mexican feeder cattle, and the impact that's having on this larger conversation that obviously the president has brought to the forefront in the last week or two with his discussions of the fact that he believes we're making too much money, that the consumer is paying too much, and according to his statements, that cattle producers need to find a way to bring our prices down. I think that was the way he said it. That's elicited a pretty strong reaction, as you might imagine, from producers across the country. This is the best cattle market a lot of our producers have seen in a very long time. It's allowing them to get well from some years of really bad markets during COVID, from that down market cycle when everybody seemed to be making money except our members. And quite frankly, they're just now starting to kind of feel like this is a good market. They're just now starting to get equipment upgraded and pay off debt and kind of, squirrel away some money for the next down market, which if you're in a cyclical business like this, is always coming. Not to mention they're making decisions right now, as everyone listening to this knows, a lot of producers around the country about what to do with their heifers. Do you send them to the barn in this high price environment? Do you retain them and rebuild the herd, as the president is saying that he wants? And what do you do with the fact that on one hand you're hearing that you need to rebuild the herd, and on the other you're hearing that you need to take less money for your cattle? That is sort of immediately become the most important issue. And it's all stemming from this conversation about the president wanting to allow beef in from Argentina in higher quantities than we have now, and his belief that that is going to lower prices for consumers at the grocery store. We don't have the economic data to show that that's the reality of the situation. What we've seen is that perhaps that would be about a 6 cent per pound reduction in beef prices. I don't know that that's going to be the linchpin for anybody making those protein choices at the grocery store. But that complex of issues, the second the president gets involved, bam, that immediately obviously is going to become the biggest set of issues that we're working on that week.
Yeah, when we think about the Argentinian beef imports in particular, we saw the comment come out a couple weeks ago on October 17th. USDA shared some thoughts. NCBA has shared some thoughts as well, and I'm glad you led us down that path, Ethan. You mentioned maybe a 6 cent difference if we do allow Argentinian beef imports to come into the country. But as a whole, what kind of concerns do you have at NCBA, and also maybe concerns from producers about importing beef from Argentina today?
Well, look, we've been engaged in this on the, Brazilian side, the Paraguayan side, the Colombian side. We've had multiple conversations over the last couple of years about our concerns with some of these trading partners, particularly in South America, that have some FMD challenges, foot and mouth disease challenges historically. Have been some concerns about their timeliness of reporting disease outbreaks, particularly Brazil has had struggles with that. Discussions and concerns about porous borders between these countries and not really being able to verify where these cattle are originating from. There are just some concerns that we have repeatedly asked the USDA teams to go down and look at and inspect. The Biden administration allowed Paraguayan beef into the country without doing an on-site inspection anytime in the last 10 years, which in our opinion is completely unacceptable. Here is another round of this where, we're sort of being asked to be okay with an influx of product from a trading partner that we don't feel totally comfortable with, and that already has a massive trade imbalance. I think like 800 million to 7 million as far as poundage each direction in the last 5 years. So we're already a massively lopsided relationship. And, the thing we would point out on top of that is imports are already up from Brazil year over year, something like 80% or more. If that was going to be the secret to lowering consumer prices on the product, we would have already seen that, I think, from the influx we've seen over the last 12 months. And the fact is that high prices are cured by high prices. I mean, the way you bring down consumer prices is by consumers not paying that price anymore and choosing a different protein or a different a dinner option. And that's sending market signals through the supply chain that, hey, we're a little too high here. And particularly the retail sector, which, by the way, has not made it into this conversation at all to this point, would then need to react to that and send those signals back down the chain through the packers, through the feeders to our producers and all the way to the cow calf. And so that is kind of the optimum way for this to work, is that the consumer sends those market signals and our supply chain reacts to them. As an industry, we have historically been pretty opposed to anything that feels like outside pressure on that, right? We don't really, as an industry, believe that the government fixes markets or improves markets. We believe, no matter who's in office, that the federal government is sort of a force that works against things like the free market. The best thing they can do is get out of the way and let that market work. And that's what we're asking for now.
Now, the plan that was released last week, Wednesday, were there some wins from your side of what that had seen? I saw that there was maybe a grazing action plan, some transparent labeling that could be of happening in these next few months that came from that plan. So what were some of those wins that you perhaps saw?
Look, everything on that list are things that our policy book supports, that our producers around the country have asked for, that we have asked for. We asked for most of this stuff in the first Trump administration. We worked with the Biden administration to no avail on a lot of these things. We asked for these things in the beginning of this Trump administration. So that's great news. Those are all wins, right? Every one of those things, we're grateful to the president, Secretary of Agriculture Rollins, Secretary of Interior Burgum, Lee Zeldin at EPA, all of those cabinet members that were involved in that. We're grateful to all of them for that list because it is a good list. And those are things that producers will benefit from. We're going to have to do some work to build some of those things out. The Endangered Species Act is a great example. That is a hugely impactful statute to producers around the country. We have producers in the Pacific Northwest right now that are losing calves at a hugely alarming rate because of gray wolves. Same down in my neck of the woods in Arizona, and up in the Great Lakes region as well. We know that the ability to access grazing land for young and beginning farmers and ranchers is a huge problem. Prices are sky high, not just for cattle but for land. So creating some opportunities for young producers to access land and get into the business is also hugely important. Definitely to be applauded that they're working on that. We had seen an earlier version that included some CRP pilot program work that would have made that easier, and that would speak, I think, a little bit more directly to our producers in the middle of the country. We were disappointed that wasn't included, and we would have hoped to have seen that as well. And maybe that's something that down the line USDA can fold into this process. Taking another run at packing plant expansion grants under that impact program that was rolled out in the Vilsack and Biden administration years, to add not more hooks necessarily, but different hooks in the system, which is what we've talked about. We need small and regional options for our producers to market cattle so they're not having to go through the big four if they don't want to, and that those other options aren't a consolation bracket. Those options have to be just as rewarding, just as able to derive premiums for producers across the country as going through, a value-added program through one of the big four or wherever else. That's the only way we actually add more choice into the system and create more options for our producers. So a lot of applause for the administration looking at that and trying to figure out how to do it better. Lord knows it was not implemented terribly well in the Biden years. That money that was put out in grant form in some cases was given to some of these kind of third-party groups that met some political objectives for President Biden and his team. They didn't understand the cattle industry. They definitely didn't understand meat processing. They probably weren't terribly interested in actually getting that money out the door to producers. And we just saw that kind of hiccup more than really catch a gear. So that's another area where we've really been pleased to see that they're looking at that and saying, hey, maybe we can claw some of that money back that was unspent and get it out the door in a more effective way. So a list of really good stuff that we think could have some real value, but none of it is, take effect next week, immediate impact kind of stuff. It's long-term stuff. It's going to take a while to develop. And surely this industry's in it for the long haul, but, in the short term, triaging this kind of balance of low cattle supplies and trying to, incentivize herd rebuild, and also lower prices for consumers. That is a very difficult thing to achieve with any of those objectives on that list on their own. In fact, part of what we've been concerned about is the president having made these comments just at that time when those producers across the country were making decisions like that, and the concern that maybe that drove them in the wrong direction. Maybe producers, sold some heifers right now in the last few weeks that they otherwise were planning to keep because they didn't like that environment. That's going to be a real shame if it sent us in the wrong direction on herd rebuild.
Ethan, I think my final question for you is, obviously there's a lot going on. You are very well in tune with that in your role. How open to discussion has the Trump administration been, Secretary Rollins' office? Are they coming to you frequently for question and dialogue? Or does it feel like we're playing reactive mode right now to some of the news and information that's been coming out?
I think probably a little bit of both. I mean, they're open and we have an ongoing dialogue with them, the White House. I mean, look, we have long-standing relationships here, right? We've been shoulder to shoulder with the president and his team through an administration already and into a second one. But this industry still has to speak truth when we have issues and concerns. And certainly we know the president is a man who shares his opinion and speaks his mind. And certainly we would hope he could respect when industries that support him have their own opinions on those things as well. And that's certainly been something we've tried to take advantage of and make clear over the last couple of weeks. Producers across the country were definitely activated by this and have shared those opinions in stereo. And so we're trying to follow up on that now and help fill some of that in with some of this discussion about what can you do here that's helpful, to alleviate some of these things.
Well, how can they stay in touch with what NCAB efforts are doing?
NCBA.org obviously is the easiest route to get to our website. You can find our policy priorities there that are passed by our membership across the country. You can get contact information for me and all my team here in Washington, as well as our colleagues in Denver on any of the issues that they work on out there. And then obviously, make sure you're engaging with your state cattlemen's association, your county cattlemen's associations. That grassroots process and those grassroots producer organizations are our strongest tool here to make sure we're getting good information out the door and to decision makers at every level of government. So, it doesn't have to be coming to CattleCon and talking to us in Nashville this year. We would love to see people there, but if you just take a night, and I know it's busy and I know you've got kids and soccer games and, rodeo and everything else, but if you can make it to that county meeting and share your opinions too, man, does it make a difference in making sure that the industry has that information and engagement we need to continue to be a really grassroots driven industry.
Well, I appreciate you two taking that on, but now for a fertilizer market update. We're on edge as supply concerns and geopolitical risks continue to shape the prices. According to our media update from Josh Linville at StoneX, Russia is the top supplier of urea, UAN, and potash to the U.S., and recent threats of sanctions have brought markets briefly spiking over fears of disrupted trade. Fortunately, those sanctions were limited to oil for now, and analysts warn that fertilizer could be a conflict in the future if the countries don't agree. Urea and UAN markets have seen significant swings over the year. Of course, Chinese exports surged this summer, only temporarily pushing prices lower, while UAN remains expensive due to its tight domestic inventories and ongoing production challenges. Ammonia supply globally is constrained, with Russia, European, and Trinidadian production struggling through the strong fall application season, which we could see maybe some relief if weather cooperates. Phosphate prices remain extremely high due to reduced Chinese exports and low North American production rates. While potash markets are stable for now, they are being closely monitored for potential disruption, again, between the U.S. and Russia trade relations. Analysts will say any government subsidy payment or sudden demand surge from farmers could further tighten already tight markets headed into our late fall. You hinted at a roller coaster week for soybeans already, Delaney. What has happened in the commodity markets?
Yeah, it's been quite the week for grains in particular. December corn saw a key reversal to the downside last week, but quickly rebounded, extending sideways trends higher. The contract broke, though, its double top from September, setting a new high for the move. November soybeans, of course, we mentioned earlier, they've had a choppy trading week, volatile range for several months, but that's now beginning to rebound higher on news of the Chinese trade deal. I think at one point they were up 13 double digits nonetheless overnight. Rabobank estimates Brazil's soybean crop at 177 million metric tons, up 3% from last year, which may weigh on markets as well. Increasing concerns over Black Sea logistics continue, with reports of rising freight costs out of Ukraine, and cattle sales continue at lower values as uncertainty remains around the Mexico border closure. Officials say reopening live cattle trade with the U.S. is still further away than expected, so that should bode well for continued cattle demand. Although we've got a lot of two-sided stories here with this, but also this happening. And so we'll see if the bulls or the bears win out for some of these headlines.
It's been interesting locally because even when we saw limit down days, sale barn prices didn't change for feeder cattle. So quite interesting there. Did I say Trinidadian right?
I wondered that earlier.
Trinidad
and Tobago.
Yeah, I might have missed that. So if you've got a better way of saying that, send us a comment, put a little audio file into our email. We always appreciate you following us on our social media channels and interacting. So thanks for pointing us in the directions of the headlines that you want to hear. But for this week, Delaney, should we let these folks have a happy Halloween?
Happy Halloween. Let's let them go.